The afternoon sun streamed through the large windows of the Riverside Community Center in suburban Portland, Oregon, casting golden rectangles across the pastel-decorated tables. Sarah Mitchell, 28, sat surrounded by towers of gift boxes wrapped in soft yellows and mint greens, her hands resting protectively over her 7-month pregnant belly. The sound of laughter and gentle conversation filled the air as 30 of her closest friends and family members celebrated the upcoming arrival of her first child. "Another onesie," Sarah announced with a warm smile, holding up a tiny piece of clothing decorated with smiling elephants. The group of women surrounding her cooed appreciatively, their phones capturing every moment of what seemed like the perfect baby shower. Sarah's best friend since college, Jessica Torres, sat beside her with a clipboard, dutifully recording each gift and its giver. "You're going to have the best-dressed baby in all of Oregon," Jessica whispered, squeezing Sarah's arm affectionately. The community center buzzed with the energy of celebration. Sarah's mother, Linda Mitchell, a 52-year-old elementary school teacher with graying auburn hair, moved gracefully between groups of guests, ensuring everyone had enough cucumber sandwiches and pink lemonade. Her pride was evident in every gesture as she spoke about her daughter's pregnancy to anyone who would listen. "Sarah's always been responsible," Linda was telling a group of neighbors. "She and David have been planning this baby for 2 years. They even took those parenting classes at the hospital." Across the room, Sarah's younger sister, Emma, 24, was showing photos on her phone to a cluster of cousins. Emma had flown in from Seattle specifically for the shower, her dark hair styled in loose waves that contrasted beautifully with her emerald dress. Despite being the younger sister, Emma had always been the more outgoing one, the life of every family gathering. "Sarah's going to be such a good mom," Emma was saying, her voice carrying that slight rasp she'd inherited from their father. "She's been reading pregnancy books since she was 16, I swear." The gifts continued to pile up around Sarah's chair. A baby monitor with video capability, soft blankets in neutral colors, a high-tech stroller that could apparently handle any terrain, bottles, pacifiers, and enough diapers to last several months. Each present was met with genuine gratitude and excitement. Dr. Amanda Chen, Sarah's obstetrician, had arrived about an hour into the shower, still wearing her hospital scrubs under a light cardigan. She was a petite woman in her early 40s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and she'd delivered hundreds of babies in her 15-year career. "How are you feeling, Sarah?" Dr. Chen asked, settling into the chair beside her patient. "Any unusual symptoms since our last appointment?" "Just the normal stuff," Sarah replied, adjusting her position in the chair. "Some back pain, trouble sleeping. The baby's been really active lately, especially at night." Dr. Chen smiled knowingly. "That's completely normal at 7 months. The baby's developing a sleep-wake cycle, and unfortunately, it's often the opposite of yours. David mentioned at your last appointment that he's been feeling the kicks too." The mention of David brought a soft smile to Sarah's face. Her husband of 3 years was at work, managing his family's hardware store downtown, but he'd promised to join them for the final hour of the shower. David Mitchell was the kind of man who still opened car doors and remembered anniversaries, the kind who had painted the nursery twice because Sarah wasn't quite happy with the first shade of yellow. "He talks to the baby every night," Sarah said, her hand moving in slow circles over her belly. "Reads stories, plays music. I think this little one already knows Daddy's voice." The afternoon continued with games and laughter. They played the traditional baby shower games, guessing the baby's weight and length, naming baby animals, and testing everyone's knowledge of children's book characters. Sarah's Aunt Margaret, a retired nurse from Eugene, won the game where participants had to identify different baby food flavors while blindfolded, much to everyone's amusement. As the gift opening continued, Sarah found herself overwhelmed by the generosity of her friends and family. There were practical gifts like car seats and changing table organizers, sentimental ones like handmade quilts and photo albums, and fun ones like stuffed animals and musical toys. "This is from David's family," Jessica announced, handing Sarah a large, beautifully wrapped box with a silver bow. Sarah carefully removed the wrapping paper to reveal a wooden rocking chair with intricate carvings along the arms and back. The craftsmanship was exquisite, clearly handmade with attention to every detail. "Oh my goodness," Sarah breathed, running her fingers along the smooth wood. "This is beautiful." "David's grandfather made it," Linda explained to the group. "He was a carpenter, made one for each of his grandchildren. David's been hoping his grandfather would make one for your baby." The room fell into an appreciative silence as everyone admired the chair. It was the kind of family heirloom that would be passed down for generations, carrying with it the love and hopes of family members both present and past. As the afternoon wound down, guests began to gather their purses and say their goodbyes. The community center, which had been transformed into a celebration space with balloons, streamers, and fresh flowers, slowly returned to its normal state as decorations were taken down and tables were folded. Sarah remained in her chair, surrounded by the remnants of wrapping paper and the mountain of gifts that would soon fill the nursery at home. She felt tired but deeply content, overwhelmed by the love and support that had surrounded her all afternoon. "You okay, sis?" Emma asked, kneeling beside Sarah's chair. "You look a little overwhelmed." "Happy overwhelmed," Sarah assured her, reaching out to squeeze Emma's hand. "I can't believe how lucky we are. This baby is going to be so loved." Emma's expression shifted slightly, a shadow passing across her features so quickly that Sarah almost missed it. For just a moment, her sister's bright smile faltered, replaced by something that looked almost like sadness or regret. "Emma, everything all right?" "Of course," Emma replied quickly, her smile returning full force. "Just thinking about how much our lives are going to change, in the best way possible, of course." The sisters embraced, and Sarah felt the familiar comfort of her sister's presence. Despite their different personalities and life paths, they had always been close, always there for each other during important moments. As the last of the guests filtered out, Sarah found herself alone with her mother, Jessica, and Emma, surrounded by the evidence of a perfectly successful baby shower. The gift boxes stood like colorful monuments to the community of love that would welcome her child into the world. "David should be here soon," Linda said, checking her watch. "He wanted to help load everything into the car." Sure enough, within minutes, David Mitchell walked through the community center doors. At 30 years old, he had the kind of steady presence that made people feel immediately comfortable. His brown hair was slightly mussed from a day of work, and he still wore the Mitchell Hardware polo shirt that had become his unofficial uniform. "How did it go?" he asked, immediately moving to Sarah's side and pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Sorry I couldn't get away earlier. We had a delivery issue that took forever to sort out." "It was perfect," Sarah said, leaning into his embrace. "Look at all of this, David. Our baby is going to have everything they could possibly need." David's eyes swept over the assembled gifts, and his expression softened with a mixture of gratitude and something that might have been anxiety. Starting a family was a big responsibility, especially when you were taking over a family business and trying to establish yourself in the community. "My grandfather's chair made it," he said, running his hand over the wooden armrest. "It's beautiful, David. I can't wait to rock our baby in it." As the family worked together to load the gifts into David's truck, the sun began to set over Portland, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. The community center parking lot, which had been full of cars just an hour earlier, was now nearly empty except for their vehicles. "I'll follow you home," Emma said, jingling her rental car keys. "I want to help set up some of this stuff in the nursery." The drive home took them through the tree-lined streets of their neighborhood, past other families' homes, where children played in front yards and couples walked dogs along the sidewalks. It was the kind of community where people knew their neighbors' names and looked out for each other's children. The perfect place to raise a family, Sarah and David's house was a modest, two-story colonial with blue shutters and a front porch that David had rebuilt himself the previous summer. The nursery was on the second floor, painted in a soft yellow with white trim, furnished with everything they'd carefully selected over the past few months. As they carried the gifts inside, Sarah felt a deep sense of contentment. Everything was falling into place, exactly as she and David had planned. The nursery was ready, they had everything the baby would need, and they were surrounded by family and friends who would help them navigate the challenges of new parenthood. "I think I need to sit down for a minute," Sarah said, settling into the living room couch as David and Emma continued to bring in boxes. "You've had a big day," Linda said, sitting beside her daughter. "You should get some rest. Emma and I can organize everything tomorrow." "I'm too excited to rest," Sarah laughed. "I keep thinking about holding our baby, seeing David become a father. I can't wait to see what they look like, whose eyes they'll have." From the hallway, where he was stacking gift boxes, David paused in his work. Something in Sarah's innocent comment seemed to strike him strangely, and for a moment, his confident demeanor wavered. "David," Sarah called, "you okay out there?" "Yeah," he replied, but his voice sounded distant. "Just thinking about logistics, where we're going to put everything." The evening continued with the comfortable chaos of organizing baby gifts and discussing plans for the remaining weeks of pregnancy. Sarah's due date was still 2 months away, but everyone agreed it was better to be over-prepared than caught off guard. As the family worked together, sorting through gifts and discussing the practical aspects of welcoming a new baby, there was an underlying current of excitement and anticipation. This was what family looked like, what love looked like, people coming together to support each other during life's most important moments. But beneath the surface of this perfect evening, subtle tensions were beginning to emerge. David's occasional distant looks, Emma's moments of unexplained sadness, and the weight of secrets that hadn't yet been spoken were creating tiny fractures in the foundation of what seemed like the perfect family preparation. The baby shower had been everything Sarah had dreamed it would be, but as the evening settled around them and the reality of impending parenthood became more concrete, the complexity of human relationships and the power of hidden truths were about to transform their lives in ways none of them could have anticipated. As they prepared for bed that night, Sarah placed her hand on her belly and whispered to her unborn child, "You're going to have such a wonderful life, little one, such a wonderful family." She had no way of knowing that in just a few weeks, the foundation of everything she believed about her family, her marriage, and her pregnancy would be shaken to its core by a truth that had been hiding in plain sight all along. 3 weeks after the baby shower, the autumn air in Portland carried the first hint of winter's approach. Sarah stood in the nursery, now completely organized with all the gifts from the shower, running her hand along the rail of the crib David had assembled the weekend before. At 8 months pregnant, every movement required careful consideration, but she found comfort in the rhythm of preparing for her baby's arrival. The morning sunlight filtered through the yellow curtains she'd hung herself, casting a warm glow over the room that would soon house their child. Everything was perfect. The changing table stocked with diapers and supplies, the dresser filled with tiny clothes organized by size, the rocking chair positioned perfectly by the window for late-night feedings. "Sarah," David's voice called from downstairs, "Dr. Chen's office is on the phone." Sarah made her way carefully down the stairs, one hand on the banister and the other supporting her belly. David stood in the kitchen, holding their cordless phone with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Mrs. Mitchell?" The receptionist's voice was professional but warm. "We need to reschedule your appointment tomorrow. Dr. Chen had a family emergency and won't be in until Thursday. Would 2 p.m. work for you?" "Of course," Sarah replied, though she felt a small pang of disappointment. She'd been looking forward to her weekly checkup, especially since the baby had been moving differently over the past few days. "Is everything all right with Dr. Chen?" "She'll be fine. Thank you for asking. We'll see you Thursday at 2. After hanging up, Sarah noticed David standing at the kitchen counter, staring out the window at their backyard where fallen leaves covered the lawn they'd planned to rake that weekend. "Everything okay?" she asked, moving to stand beside him. "Just thinking about work stuff," he said, but his voice lacked its usual certainty. "The store's been busier than usual with people getting ready for winter. Everyone needs weather stripping and heaters." Sarah studied her husband's profile. In the 3 years they'd been married, she'd learned to read the subtle signs of his moods. David was a straightforward man who rarely kept his feelings hidden, which made his recent moments of distraction all the more noticeable. "David, you've seemed a little off lately. Since the baby shower, actually. Is there something you want to talk about?" He turned to face her, and for a moment, she saw something flash across his features. Anxiety, maybe, or guilt. But then his expression softened into the familiar, loving look she knew so well. "I'm just nervous about becoming a father," he said, reaching out to place his hands on her belly. "It's a big responsibility. I want to make sure I do everything right." The baby kicked in response to David's touch, and they both smiled at the familiar miracle of feeling their child move. It was moments like these that reminded Sarah how fortunate they were, how much love was already waiting for this baby. "You're going to be an amazing father," she assured him, covering his hands with hers. "I've seen how you are with your nephew Jake, how patient and kind you are. Our baby is so lucky." That afternoon, Emma called from Seattle. She'd been checking in more frequently since the baby shower, which Sarah appreciated, even though she couldn't shake the feeling that her sister was being unusually attentive. "How are you feeling, sis?" Emma's voice carried clearly through the phone despite the distance. "Huge," Sarah laughed, settling into the living room couch with her feet elevated. "This baby is running out of room in there. I swear they're doing gymnastics." "Have you and David talked about names lately? Last time we spoke, you were still debating between a few options. We're getting closer to a decision. David really likes traditional names, family names. I'm leaning towards something a little more modern." Sarah paused, feeling another strong kick. "Actually, I wanted to ask you something. You seemed a little emotional at the baby shower. Is everything okay with you?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line, long enough that Sarah wondered if the call had been dropped. "Emma? I'm here. Sorry, I've been thinking a lot about family lately, about how important it is to be honest with the people you love." "That's kind of a cryptic thing to say," Sarah replied, shifting to find a more comfortable position. "Is there something specific you're thinking about?" Another pause, shorter this time. "No, nothing specific. I guess pregnancy makes everyone philosophical. How's David handling everything?" The subject change felt abrupt, but Sarah didn't press. Emma had always been the more emotional of the two sisters, prone to deep thoughts and unexpected observations. "He's been a little stressed about work and money, but that's normal, right? We're about to have a baby. Everything's about to change." "Yeah," Emma said quietly. "Everything's about to change." That evening, David came home, later than usual, explaining that he'd had to deal with a difficult customer who'd wanted to return a lawnmower they'd clearly damaged themselves. As he recounted the story over dinner, Sarah noticed he seemed more animated than he'd been in weeks, as if focusing on work problems was easier than thinking about whatever had been troubling him. "Mrs. Patterson stopped by the store today," David said, cutting into his chicken. "She wanted to know if we'd gotten the baby gifts she ordered for you. Apparently, she special ordered some kind of organic cotton blankets. That was sweet of her. She's been so excited about the baby. I think she's hoping to be honorary grandmother since her own kids live so far away." David nodded, but Sarah noticed he'd stopped eating and was staring at his plate with an expression she couldn't interpret. "David, what is it? Do you ever think about genetics?" he asked suddenly. "Like, what traits the baby will inherit from each of us?" The question caught Sarah off guard. "Sometimes, I guess, I hope they get your patience and your work ethic, and maybe my eyes. People always say I have nice eyes." "But what if—" David started, then stopped himself. "Never mind, it's not important." "What if what?" "Nothing. I'm just overthinking things." That night, Sarah woke around 2 a.m. to find David's side of the bed empty. She could hear movement downstairs, the soft sound of someone pacing in the living room. Carefully, she made her way down to find David sitting in his recliner, staring at the wall where they'd hung their wedding photos. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly. He startled as if he hadn't heard her approach. "Sorry, did I wake you?" "No, the baby did. They seem to think 2 a.m. is party time." Sarah lowered herself onto the couch, studying her husband's face in the dim light from the street lamp outside. "David, you're scaring me a little. What's going on?" For a long moment he didn't respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "What if everything we think we know turns out to be wrong?" "What do you mean?" "What if the life we've built, the plans we've made, what if it's all based on something that isn't true?" Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. "David, you're not making sense." "What isn't true?" He looked at her then, and in his eyes she saw a pain she'd never seen before, a conflict that seemed to be tearing him apart from the inside. "I can't," he said, shaking his head. "I can't do this to you. Not now." "Do what to me? David, please, you're frightening me." But he was already standing, already moving toward the stairs. "Go back to bed, Sarah. Everything's fine. I'm just worried about being a good father." Sarah remained on the couch long after David had gone back upstairs, her hand resting on her belly as the baby continued to move restlessly inside her. Something was very wrong, something her husband felt he couldn't share with her, and the not knowing was almost worse than any truth could be. The next few days passed in a strange sort of suspended animation. David went to work, came home, helped with dinner, and made conversation about ordinary things, but there was a distance between them that hadn't been there before. Sarah found herself watching him carefully, looking for clues about what might be troubling him so deeply. On Thursday, Sarah's appointment with Dr. Chen provided a welcome distraction from the tension at home. The doctor's office was busy, filled with pregnant women in various stages and new mothers with tiny babies. Sarah had been coming here for 8 months now, and the familiar routine of weight checks and blood pressure readings was comforting. "Everything looks good," Dr. Chen said, reviewing Sarah's chart. "Blood pressure is normal, baby's heartbeat is strong. How are you feeling?" "Physically, pretty good. Tired, but that's normal, right?" "Emotionally?" Sarah hesitated. "My husband has been acting strangely lately, distant. Is that common for expectant fathers?" Dr. Chen smiled knowingly. "Very common. Many men experience anxiety as the due date approaches. The reality of fatherhood can be overwhelming, especially for first-time dads. Has he expressed any specific concerns?" "Not really. He keeps saying he's worried about being a good father, but it feels like there's something else, something he won't tell me." "Have you tried having a direct conversation with him? Sometimes men need permission to express their fears." After the appointment, Sarah drove home through the familiar streets of their neighborhood, thinking about Dr. Chen's advice. Maybe she had been too passive, too willing to let David work through whatever was bothering him on his own. Maybe what their marriage needed was the kind of honest conversation they'd always prided themselves on having. She found David in the garage when she got home, organizing tools with the kind of methodical precision he applied to projects when he needed to think. The concrete floor was swept clean, and every tool hung in its designated place on the pegboard he'd installed when they first moved in. "We need to talk," Sarah said, settling onto the wooden stool David kept by his workbench. David's hand stilled on the wrench he'd been cleaning. "About what?" "About whatever it is you're not telling me. David, we're about to have a baby together. We can't have secrets between us." Some secrets are meant to protect people," he said quietly, still not looking at her. "Protect me from what?" Finally, he turned to face her, and Sarah saw that same conflict in his eyes, the same pain that seemed to be eating at him from the inside. "What if I told you something that would change everything? Something that would hurt you more than keeping quiet?" Sarah's heart began to race, and she felt the baby respond to her increased anxiety with a series of sharp kicks. "What could be that bad, David? Are you having an affair? Are you sick? What?" "No," he said quickly, "nothing like that. I love you, Sarah. I've never loved anyone the way I love you." "Then what is it?" David was quiet for so long that Sarah began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his words were careful, measured. "Do you trust me?" "Of course I do." "Then trust me that some things are better left unsaid, at least for now." It wasn't the answer Sarah had hoped for, but something in David's tone told her that pushing further wouldn't get her anywhere. Whatever secret he was keeping, he wasn't ready to share it, and forcing the issue might only make things worse. That night, as they lay in bed, Sarah stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of her husband's behavior. In all the time she'd known David, he'd never been secretive or evasive. He was the kind of man who said what he meant and meant what he said, which made his recent behavior all the more troubling. The baby seemed to sense her distress, moving restlessly throughout the night. Sarah found herself talking to her unborn child in whispers, promising that everything would be okay, that whatever was troubling their father would work itself out. But deep down, she was beginning to suspect that whatever David was hiding was bigger than pre-fatherhood anxiety, bigger than work stress or financial concerns. Something fundamental had shifted in their relationship, and she didn't know how to fix it without understanding what was broken. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the perfect life she thought they'd built was about to be tested in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The foundation of their marriage, which had always seemed so solid, was showing cracks that might run deeper than either of them realized. The truth, whatever it was waiting just beneath the surface of their daily lives, and Sarah had the uncomfortable sense that once it emerged, nothing would ever be the same again. The November rain drummed steadily against the windows of Sarah and David's house, creating a rhythm that seemed to match Sarah's increasingly anxious heartbeat. At 36 weeks pregnant, she moved through their home with the careful deliberation of someone carrying precious cargo, but her mind was racing with questions that had been building for weeks. It was Saturday morning, and David had left early to open the hardware store, claiming they had a delivery scheduled before regular business hours. Sarah had watched from the bedroom window as his truck pulled out of the driveway, noting the tension in his shoulders even from a distance. Emma had driven down from Seattle the night before, ostensibly for a weekend visit, but Sarah suspected her sister's timing wasn't coincidental. Over breakfast, Emma had been unusually quiet, picking at her pancakes and avoiding eye contact in a way that reminded Sarah of their childhood, when Emma was hiding something she knew she'd eventually have to confess. "Okay," Sarah said, setting down her orange juice with more force than necessary. "What's going on?" Emma looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" "I mean, David's been acting like he's carrying the weight of the world for weeks. You've been calling me every other day with this weird concern in your voice, and now you're here being all mysterious and jumpy. Something is going on, and I'm tired of being the only person who doesn't know what it is." Emma's fork clattered against her plate. For a moment she looked like she might cry, but then her expression hardened with resolution. "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you weeks ago." The baby kicked hard, as if sensing the shift in atmosphere. Sarah placed a protective hand over her belly and waited. "Do you remember the night of your bachelorette party, 2 years ago, in Seattle?" Sarah nodded slowly. It had been a weekend celebration with her college friends, hosted by Emma, full of the kind of innocent fun that precedes major life changes. You had food poisoning the second night. You were so sick you could barely leave the hotel room. I remember. You stayed with me while everyone else went out. Sarah's voice was cautious. "Emma, where is this going?" Emma took a shaky breath. "David drove up from Portland because he was worried about you. He arrived around midnight, and you were finally sleeping. I convinced him not to wake you up." The rain seemed to grow louder, filling the silence that stretched between the sisters. "We went to the hotel bar, just to talk, to kill time until you woke up. We had a few drinks, and we were talking about how happy you were, how perfect you and David were together." Emma's voice broke. "Sarah, I kissed him." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She felt the air leave her lungs, felt the baby respond to her sudden distress with a series of sharp movements. "You what?" It was stupid and wrong, and I regretted it the second it happened. David pushed me away immediately. He was horrified, Sarah. He told me it could never happen again, that it was a mistake and we had to pretend it never happened. Sarah stared at her sister, trying to process this information. Emma, who had been her maid of honor, who had helped plan her wedding, who had stood beside her as she promised to love David forever. That's what you couldn't tell me. That's the big secret that's been eating at everyone. Emma's face crumpled. There's more. Those two words hung in the air like a death sentence. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach, a fear that went beyond betrayal into territory she couldn't yet name. What do you mean, there's more? After you and David moved back to Portland, after you got married, I couldn't stop thinking about him. I know how that sounds. I know how selfish and horrible it is, but I couldn't get him out of my head. Sarah's hands were shaking now. The baby was moving almost violently, responding to her elevated heart rate and stress hormones. Emma, please tell me you didn't. I came to visit you guys last Christmas. Remember, I stayed for a week. Sarah remembered. Emma had seemed different during that visit, more subdued, more helpful around the house. Sarah had attributed it to her sister finally maturing, becoming more considerate. David was working late a lot that week, finishing year-end inventory at the store. You were tired from your new job, going to bed early. Emma's voice was barely a whisper now. One night, I went to bring him dinner at the store. We talked, and I told him how I felt. I told him I thought I was in love with him. Emma. Sarah's voice was a warning, a plea for her sister to stop before she destroyed everything. He told me I was wrong, that what I was feeling wasn't real. He said he loved you, and only you, and that I needed to get help if I couldn't accept that. Emma was crying now, tears streaming down her face. But Sarah, I convinced him to have one drink with me, just one, to say goodbye to whatever I thought I felt. The room felt like it was spinning. Sarah gripped the edge of the table, trying to anchor herself as her world began to tilt off its axis. We went to that bar downtown, the one near the river. We talked for hours about you, about how much he loved you, about how he wanted to start a family with you. I was saying goodbye, Sarah. I swear to you, I was trying to let go. But you didn't. We had too much to drink. David called a cab, but while we were waiting, Emma covered her face with her hands. We slept together, Sarah, once. That one night in December. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah felt like she was underwater, like all sound had been muffled except for the pounding of her own heartbeat. The baby had gone still, as if even her unborn child was holding its breath. Get out! Sarah, please! Get out of my house! Sarah's voice was deadly quiet, more frightening than if she had screamed. You need to know the rest. There's more. Sarah's laugh was bitter, broken. What else could there possibly be, Emma? What else could you have done to destroy my life? Emma was sobbing now, but she forced herself to continue. David was consumed with guilt. He called me the next day, devastated. He said he had to tell you that he couldn't live with the secret, but he didn't tell me because I begged him not to. I told him it would destroy you for no reason, that it was one mistake that would never happen again. I convinced him that the guilt was punishment enough. Sarah felt nauseous, and not from pregnancy. When was this, Emma? What date in December? Emma's face went white. December 15th. Sarah's mind raced, calculating. December 15th. She had gotten pregnant in early January. The timing. No. The word came out as a gasp. No, no, no. Sarah, I don't know. We don't know. The timing. It could be David's baby. It probably is David's baby. Could be. Sarah's voice rose to a shriek. Could be. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I wanted to tell you, but David made me promise. He said he would handle it, that he would figure out what to do. Everything clicked into place. David's strange behavior since the baby shower, his questions about genetics, his inability to sleep, his cryptic comments about truth and secrets. He had been living with this uncertainty for months, watching his wife's belly grow, not knowing if the child she carried was his or his sister-in-law's biological father's child. Does David think? He doesn't know what to think. Neither do I. Sarah, you have to understand. We were both drunk. We both made a terrible mistake, but we both love you more than anything in the world. Sarah stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the kitchen floor. She needed air, needed space, needed to get away from Emma's tear-streaked face and devastating words. I need you to leave, right now. Sarah, please, we need to talk about this. We need to figure out what? Whether my baby belongs to my husband or my sister? Sarah's voice was shaking with rage. Get out, Emma. Get out and don't come back. Emma gathered her purse with trembling hands, pausing at the door. I love you, Sarah. I know you can't believe that right now, but I do. Everything I did was wrong, but my love for you has always been real. After Emma left, Sarah stood alone in her kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of what had been, just an hour ago, a normal Saturday morning. The pancakes sat cooling on their plates, the coffee grew cold in their mugs, and Sarah's entire world lay in ruins around her feet. She moved through the house like a ghost, touching familiar objects that no longer felt like they belonged to her life. The nursery, with its carefully chosen yellow walls and organized baby clothes, felt like a mockery. The wedding photos on the living room wall seemed to be mocking her with their images of happiness and trust. The baby began moving again, and Sarah found herself talking to her unborn child for the first time since Emma's revelation. I don't know who you are, she whispered, her hand on her belly. I don't know who your father is, but I know I love you. Whatever else happens, I love you. She called in sick to her part-time job at the local library, unable to imagine facing other people, making small talk, pretending that her life hadn't just imploded. Instead, she spent the day walking through the house, trying to make sense of the betrayal, trying to figure out what came next. David came home at his usual time, calling out his normal greeting as he entered through the kitchen door. Sarah was sitting at the dining room table, her hands folded in her lap, staring at the wall. Hey, honey, David said, hanging his jacket on the back of a chair. How was your day? Is Emma still here? Sarah looked at him then, really looked at him, seeing him through the lens of Emma's confession. His familiar face, the face she had loved for years, now seemed like that of a stranger. She told me, Sarah said simply. David went completely still. The color drained from his face, and Sarah watched as the weight of those 3 words hit him like a physical blow. Sarah, all of it, David. The kiss at my bachelorette party, the night in December, the possibility that this baby... She couldn't finish the sentence. David sank into the chair across from her, his head in his hands. I wanted to tell you. God, Sarah, I've wanted to tell you every day since it happened. But you didn't. Emma convinced me it would only hurt you. She said the guilt was punishment enough, that there was no point in destroying our marriage over one terrible mistake. Sarah's laugh was hollow. One terrible mistake? David, you slept with my sister while I was home pregnant, thinking about our future together. I wasn't thinking clearly. I was drunk and confused and... Don't. Sarah's voice cut through his explanation like a knife. Don't you dare make excuses. You made a choice, David. You chose to betray me with the one person in the world I trusted most. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of revelation settling between them like a wall. Outside, the rain continued its steady percussion against the windows. What do we do now? David asked finally. I don't know. Sarah's voice was barely audible. I don't know if this baby is yours. I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if our marriage can survive this. Sarah, please, I love you. I've never stopped loving you, not for 1 second. But you loved her too, didn't you? At least that night. David was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. I was confused. Emma was saying all these things about how she felt, and I was trying to convince her that what she felt wasn't real. But somewhere in that conversation, I started questioning whether what I felt for her was just brotherly affection or something more. The honesty of his answer was somehow worse than a lie would have been. The baby, David. Do you think? I don't know. The timing makes it possible. You got pregnant about 3 weeks after... He couldn't finish. Sarah felt the baby move, a gentle flutter that reminded her that whatever else was happening, there was an innocent life depending on her, a child who had done nothing wrong, regardless of who their father might be. "We need to know," she said. "A paternity test." "Yes, after the baby is born. We need to know for sure." David nodded, though the thought clearly terrified him. "And then what?" "I don't know. I can't think that far ahead right now." That night they slept in the same bed but on opposite sides, a chasm of hurt and uncertainty between them. Sarah lay awake, listening to David's restless breathing, knowing he was as sleepless as she was. The next few weeks passed in a strange sort of limbo. David moved through the motions of being a supportive husband, but there was a desperation in his actions, as if he was trying to prove his worthiness through gestures of devotion. Sarah accepted his help mechanically, but the easy intimacy they had once shared was gone, replaced by a politeness that felt worse than anger. Emma called repeatedly, but Sarah refused to answer. Her sister left voicemails filled with apologies and pleas for forgiveness, but Sarah wasn't ready to hear them. The betrayal was too fresh, too devastating. Dr. Chen noticed the change at Sarah's next appointment. "You seem stressed," she observed, reviewing Sarah's elevated blood pressure readings. "Is everything all right at home?" "Family problems," Sarah said simply, not trusting herself to say more. "Stress isn't good for you or the baby, especially this close to your due date. Is there anything I can do to help?" Sarah almost laughed at the question. Unless Dr. Chen could turn back time and prevent her husband from sleeping with her sister, there wasn't much she could do. "We'll be fine," Sarah lied. But they weren't fine, and as Sarah's due date approached, the tension in their house became almost unbearable. David tried to engage her in conversations about baby names and logistics for the hospital, but every discussion felt loaded with the weight of their uncertain future. 2 weeks before her due date, Sarah woke up in the middle of the night with strong, regular contractions. David drove her to the hospital through empty streets, both of them quiet except for Sarah's breathing exercises. "Whatever happens," David said as they pulled into the hospital parking lot, "I want you to know that I love you, that I've loved you since the day we met, and I'll love you until the day I die." Sarah looked at him, this man who had been her partner, her best friend, her safe harbor, and felt her heart break all over again, because she still loved him too, despite everything, and that made the betrayal hurt even more. "I know," she whispered. "That's what makes this so hard." As they walked into the hospital together, Sarah realized that, in a few hours, they would have their answer. The baby about to be born would either confirm David's paternity or shatter their family completely. The truth, which had been hiding beneath the surface of their lives for months, was finally about to emerge. And once it did, there would be no going back to the life they had built together, no matter how much they both wished they could. The next chapter of their story was about to begin, and neither of them knew how it would end. The labor and delivery ward at Portland General Hospital buzzed with the constant activity of new life entering the world. Sarah had been in active labor for 8 hours, and the November morning sun was streaming through the windows of her private room as she gripped the bed rails through another contraction. David stood beside her, holding a damp washcloth and trying to offer comfort, but the emotional distance between them was palpable even in this most intimate of moments. The nurses, focused on the medical aspects of delivery, seemed unaware of the underlying tension that had nothing to do with the physical challenge Sarah was facing. "You're doing great, Mrs. Mitchell," encouraged Lisa, the labor nurse who had been with them since the early morning hours. "We're getting close now. Dr. Chen should be here any minute." Dr. Chen arrived just as Sarah was entering the final stage of labor, her calm presence immediately bringing a sense of control to the room. She had delivered hundreds of babies, but she always treated each birth as the miracle it was. "Sarah, you're almost there," Dr. Chen said, positioning herself at the foot of the bed. "Just a few more pushes and you'll meet your baby." The final moments of labor were a blur of intensity and effort. Sarah pushed with everything she had, David held her hand and whispered encouragement, and then suddenly, after months of anticipation and weeks of uncertainty, their baby entered the world with a strong, healthy cry. "It's a girl," Dr. Chen announced, lifting the tiny, perfect infant. "A beautiful baby girl." Sarah collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted but filled with an overwhelming rush of love as she heard her daughter's first cries. All the questions and doubts of the past weeks faded into the background as the most primal instinct took over, the need to hold and protect her child. "She's perfect," David whispered, tears streaming down his face as he watched the nurses clean and examine their daughter. Within minutes, the baby was placed on Sarah's chest, skin to skin, and Sarah felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. The tiny face was wrinkled and red, but beautiful beyond description. Fine, dark hair covered her head, and when she opened her eyes for the first time, they were a deep blue-gray that could change to any color as she grew. "Hello, sweet girl," Sarah whispered, stroking her daughter's tiny cheek. "I'm your mommy." David leaned over them both, his finger gently touching their daughter's hand. "She's so small, so perfect." For a few precious moments, they were just a family welcoming their first child into the world. The betrayal, the uncertainty, the questions about paternity all faded into the background as they marveled at the miracle they had created. But reality crept back in as the initial euphoria wore off. Sarah found herself studying her daughter's features, looking for clues about her paternity. The baby's hair was dark, like both David's and Emma's. Her nose was small and slightly upturned, but too indistinct yet to favor either parent. Her eyes, still unfocused and changing, offered no answers. "She has your chin," David said softly, but there was uncertainty in his voice. The next few hours were filled with the typical hospital routine: weighing, measuring, testing, and paperwork. Their daughter was healthy and strong, weighing 7 pounds 2 ounces and measuring 19 inches long. All her vital signs were normal, and she scored perfectly on her newborn assessments. "Have you chosen a name?" asked the nurse who was preparing the birth certificate paperwork. Sarah and David looked at each other. They had discussed names extensively during the pregnancy, but somehow they had never settled on a definitive choice for a girl. "Grace," Sarah said suddenly. "Grace Elizabeth Mitchell." David nodded. "Grace. It's perfect. Grace Elizabeth Mitchell." The name felt right, felt like it belonged to the beautiful child sleeping in Sarah's arms. Grace because they needed Grace to get through whatever came next. Elizabeth after Sarah's grandmother, who had always been a source of strength and wisdom. Emma arrived that afternoon, carrying flowers and wearing the kind of nervous expression of someone who wasn't sure they'd be welcome. Sarah watched through the doorway as Emma spoke quietly with David in the hallway. Their conversation too low to overhear, but their body language revealing the continued tension between all of them. When Emma finally entered the room, her eyes immediately went to the baby sleeping in Sarah's arms. "She's beautiful," Emma whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "She's absolutely perfect." Sarah looked at her sister, this woman who had shared her childhood, her secrets, her dreams, and who had betrayed her in the most fundamental way possible. But she also saw the genuine emotion on Emma's face as she looked at Grace, the same wonder and love that everyone felt when meeting a newborn. "Would you like to hold her?" Sarah asked, surprising herself with the offer. Emma's eyes widened. "Are you sure?" Sarah nodded, carefully transferring Grace to her sister's arms. Emma held the baby with the practiced ease of someone who had helped care for cousins and friends' children over the years. "Hello, little Grace," Emma murmured. "I'm your Aunt Emma. I love you so much already." As Sarah watched Emma hold her daughter, she found herself studying both their faces, looking for similarities, searching for clues. Did Grace's nose resemble Emma's slightly more than David's? Was there something in the shape of her face that echoed her sister's features? But Grace was too young, too undefined, to offer any definitive answers. She was simply a beautiful baby who looked like herself, carrying within her DNA the secrets that would eventually reveal the truth about her parentage. David returned to the room as visiting hours were ending, his face showing the strain of the emotional conversation he'd had with Emma. "I should go," Emma said, carefully handing Grace back to Sarah. "Let you rest." "Emma," Sarah called as her sister reached the door. "Thank you for coming and for telling me the truth. It was the right thing to do, even though it was hard." Emma nodded, unable to speak around the emotion clogging her throat. "I love you, Sarah. Both of you. All three of you." That night, as Grace slept in the hospital bassinet beside her bed, Sarah lay awake, thinking about the future. In a few weeks, when Grace was old enough, they would be able to do a paternity test. A simple cheek swab would reveal definitively whether David or Emma's mystery partner was Grace's biological father. But as she watched her daughter sleep, Sarah realized that part of her didn't want to know. Grace was hers, had grown inside her body, had been loved and wanted from the moment of conception. Did it matter who had contributed the other half of her genetics? David had been sleeping fitfully in the reclining chair beside her bed, but he woke as she shifted to check on Grace. "Can't sleep?" he asked softly. "Too much to think about." David got up and moved to stand beside the bassinet, looking down at their sleeping daughter. "She's so peaceful, like none of the adult drama matters to her at all." "Maybe it doesn't," Sarah said. "Maybe what matters is that she's loved and wanted and safe." "Sarah, about the paternity test, I know we need to do it. We need to know for sure. What if the results aren't what we hope?" Sarah was quiet for a long time, considering the question that had been haunting them both. "Then we'll figure it out, all of us. Because Grace didn't ask for any of this, and she deserves to grow up in a family that loves her unconditionally." They went home 2 days later, carrying Grace in the infant car seat they had installed so carefully months earlier. The house felt different with a baby in it, filled with new sounds and rhythms, and the constant awareness of this tiny person who depended on them completely. Sarah's mother came to stay for a week, helping with meals and laundry, and offering the kind of practical support that new parents desperately need. Linda was over the moon about her first grandchild, spending hours holding Grace and marveling at her tiny features. "She has the Mitchell family chin," Linda declared confidently. "And look at those long fingers. She's going to be tall like her daddy." Sarah and David exchanged glances but said nothing. Everyone saw what they wanted to see in Grace's features, projecting their own hopes and expectations onto her innocent face. The paternity test was scheduled for when Grace was 6 weeks old enough for the procedure to be completely safe and accurate. The weeks leading up to it were filled with the typical challenges of new parenthood: sleepless nights, feeding schedules, and the gradual adjustment to their new reality. But underneath the normal stress of caring for a newborn was the constant awareness of the unanswered question. Every time someone commented on Grace's appearance, every time she made a facial expression that reminded them of someone in the family, Sarah and David were reminded of what they didn't know. Emma called regularly, but hadn't visited since the hospital. She sent gifts for Grace and cards for Sarah and David, but she seemed to understand that her physical presence was still too complicated for everyone involved. "I miss her," Sarah admitted to David one evening as they sat together on the couch. Grace, sleeping peacefully in her bouncy seat nearby. "I miss my sister, but I don't know how to get past what happened." "Time," David said. "It's going to take time for all of us." The morning of the paternity test, Sarah woke with a knot of anxiety in her stomach. Grace was 6 weeks old, healthy and growing, beginning to focus her eyes and respond to familiar voices. She had started smiling, those first magical expressions that weren't just gas, but genuine responses to the faces she loved. The test itself was simple and painless, just a cheek swab for Grace and David, collected by a nurse who treated it as routine as any other medical procedure. The samples would be sent to a lab, and they would have results within a few days. "That's it?" Sarah asked, as the nurse sealed the samples in their respective containers. "That's it," the nurse confirmed. "You should have results by Friday." Friday. 3 days to wait for answers that would determine the course of their family's future. Those 3 days felt like an eternity. Sarah found herself alternating between wanting to know immediately and wishing they could live in uncertainty forever. At least, while they didn't know for sure, all possibilities remained open. David threw himself into preparations for returning to work, organizing systems for Sarah to manage while he was gone, but his distraction was obvious. He would start conversations and lose track of what he was saying, would stare at Grace with an expression that mixed love with fear. On Friday morning, Dr. Chen's office called with the results. "Mrs. Mitchell, we have your test results. Would you prefer to receive them over the phone, or would you like to come in?" Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she could barely speak. "Over the phone is fine. The test confirms that David Mitchell is the biological father of Grace Elizabeth Mitchell. The probability of paternity is 99.9%. Sarah sank into the nearest chair, overwhelmed with relief. "Thank you. Thank you so much." After hanging up, she immediately called David at the store. "David, it's definitive. You're Grace's father. There's no doubt." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Sarah wondered if the call had been dropped. When David finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Really? You're sure?" 99.9% sure. "She's yours, David. She's ours." That evening, as they sat together with Grace sleeping peacefully between them, Sarah felt something shift in their relationship. The question that had been hanging over them for months was finally answered, but it didn't magically fix everything that had been broken. "I'm so relieved," David said, gently stroking Grace's tiny hand. "But Sarah, I know the paternity test doesn't change what I did. It doesn't erase the betrayal." Sarah looked at her husband, this man who had fathered her child, who had also betrayed her trust in the most painful way possible. "No, it doesn't," she agreed. "But it gives us a foundation to rebuild from. Grace is ours, David. She's the best of both of us, and she deserves parents who can find their way back to each other. Do you think we can find our way back?" Sarah was quiet for a long time, watching their daughter sleep, thinking about forgiveness and trust, and the work it would take to repair their marriage. "I think we have to try," she said finally, "for Grace and for ourselves. But David, things can't go back to the way they were. We need counseling, we need complete honesty, and we need time." "Whatever it takes," David said immediately. "Whatever you need, whatever we need as a family. I'll do anything to earn back your trust." That night, as Grace slept peacefully in her crib, and David slept beside her for the first time in weeks, without the weight of uncertainty, Sarah stared at the ceiling and thought about the future. The secret that had nearly destroyed their family was finally out in the open. The truth about Grace's paternity had been revealed, but the hardest work was still ahead of them, learning to forgive, rebuilding trust, and creating a new foundation for their marriage. As Grace stirred in her sleep, making the tiny sounds that had become the soundtrack of their new life, Sarah placed her hand over her heart and made a promise. Whatever it took, however long it took, she would find a way to heal their family. Grace deserved nothing less than parents who loved each other as much as they loved her. The baby, who had been the center of so much uncertainty, had become their greatest hope for the future. In her innocent face, Sarah could see the possibility of redemption, of second chances, of love that was strong enough to overcome even the deepest betrayals. The truth had been painful, but it had also set them free. Now the real work of healing could begin.